discussing religious beliefs and supernatural beliefs with other people. I'm atheist myself, but I love discussing it. I find it endlessly entertaining and interesting. But there are some points that I think discussing these ideas with someone could potentially cause more harm than good. Existential crises, depression, anxiety, that sort of thing. Do you see at any point we should abstain from challenging religious or supernatural beliefs? Like, assuming it doesn't, they don't have any really destructive, irrational beliefs, like anti-vax or not having proper medical treatment, those sorts of things.
I would say that I would say that as far as religious beliefs go, if you mean ones in particular based on faith, that alone is detrimental as far as a type of belief. What I would say is if you find someone and they're on their deathbed and they have an hour a day, a week to live, they may be less interested in discussing whether or not they're actually going to go to heaven than you might be. And so on that point, yeah. But you brought up existential crises. And so a healthy person that's walking around, Joe Schmo, that's your friend, I don't see that it may be difficult to leave religion as sufficient reason, assuming that Joe Schmo is willing to discuss religion with Joe Schmo.
My take's pretty easy. I'll have the conversation with anybody that wants to, and if somebody doesn't want to, I probably won't unless there's egregious, obvious harm or something along those lines. But when you started talking about the concerns of existential crisis, it almost read to me as if you're wondering if by having conversations, even with people who are willing, that you're going to wind up doing harm. Maybe they'll lose their hope or become despondent or whatever if they don't.
Correct.
Yeah. Tough. My take on this is really simple. If I'm honestly and accurately discussing the subject with somebody, I'm not responsible for flawed conclusions they reach beyond that. So if somebody becomes convinced that they're not going to have an afterlife and that leads them down a trail of nihilism to where they think this life is worthless to the point that they're suicidal, that's a big deal. But unless you can tell that that's what's going to happen, it's not like you're morally responsible for the decisions they make afterwards. But what I would say is if that's a concern, and if you start to feel that's a concern in conversation, I'd pause, because one of the things is that while that's not always easy to counter, it's possible to have a conversation with someone and point them to Chris Johnson's book and documentary, to all the things that non-believers have said about a life of joy and meaning without a God, so that you're giving them the tools. Somebody once emailed nonprofits to say, what do you do when you get religion? What do you replace it with? And Dennis Loubet famously said, what do you replace it with when you cure cancer? And the problem is that you could cure somebody's cancer, and if their entire life was subsumed with being if cancer was the defining thing in their life, they could find that now they don't know what to do with the rest of their life, or maybe they've run themselves into debt and you've caused problems, but you still cured the cancer. So one of my life goals is to make sure that I try to give people the tools they need, the skeptical tools, the humanist tools, to make it through life. But at the end of the day, if all I've done is have a conversation where I've expressed how and why I think what I think, and this causes somebody else to, have an existential crisis, I have some problem with it, but it's not going to keep me from having the conversation. If anything, it's going to cause me to have more conversations with them.
Yeah, I think that's good. Are you asking this question because recently you've had a series of conversations about religion?
I tend to have those sort of during my life, but sort of specifically now, I have an individual who I'm talking to, and she's very, very rational. She, to the point where she more or less has decided that her belief in the supernatural may or may not be true. She has no beliefs that would be destructive to her or others. But I worry, because she's a very anxious person, to sort of discuss this with her and sort of push her more in the direction that would increase her anxiety. that's essentially it. And again, I don't want to cause more harm to her. I don't want to increase her anxiety anymore, because it's more or less a vague feeling that she has, as opposed to, she's even agreed that there's a very good chance that this may not actually exist at all. But it's giving her some comfort.
But are you causing harm, or is it the fact that the religion or the supernatural beliefs have caused the harm and you're undoing it? And by undoing the first part, you're concerned about damage when there's a lot more to undo there, to rebuild a life.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, when I told my parents that I was an atheist, they are now going to be miserable for the rest of their life. They think I'm working for Satan. They know they are convinced that I'm going to hell. I didn't cause that damage to them. Their religion did. Simply, it's kind of like in the court of law, where the truth is always a defense to slander.
Yeah.
But
okay.
In the US.
I think what I'm basically saying is that there's an opportunity for more conversations, and it's if any of us were just walking around going, "Here's why you're wrong about God. I'm done with you," and move on to the next. That is not necessarily the right way to go about it, and you may be doing some harm. You got to remember that we're dealing with human beings, and that if the goal is to get somebody to have a better life, then you don't just start at step one. You don't just stop at step one.
Yeah. What I would say is we don't go door to door. We leave that for Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons.
Yeah, instead they run around spray painting buildings and walls. In your intro, sorry.
Yes.
Well, that's fair.
Yeah. And we do it every week, and they always paint over it.
it.
What am I going to do? What I will say is, I think it was the last time we were on a show together, I think it was AXP, we took a call from Manda, where she was calling in and distressed because a belief in an afterlife was what she used to comfort herself after, I think, her sister died, or her close relative died. And before we got her to a place where she was saying that she didn't believe, one of the things that I wanted to highlight is whether or not you're using religious coping mechanisms, or using religion or religious beliefs or supernatural beliefs even, as your friend is doing, to cope with aspects of reality or anxieties that you have. There are coping mechanisms that don't necessitate believing things for bad reasons or believing things that are false.
I'd also recommend, I remember that call, I'd also recommend listening to it, because the one thing you'll notice is that we didn't go, okay, your sister's dead, get over it, move on. I mean,
right.
And that's basically what I'm cautioning against. Yeah. A lot of it has to do with the motivation.
A coping mechanism.
Sorry?
You offered a coping mechanism along with the obvious sort of truth.
Yeah. And there's a lot out there. As a matter of fact, one of the things that maybe, Jamie, why don't you come over later this week and we'll talk together. We'll talk about putting together the list of resources that we've talked about putting together for ages.
Yeah.
As just like a quick reference. Here's some books, here's some websites, here's some videos. What are you having trouble dealing with?
I know that there's a person named Mark who volunteers here occasionally that has a book together, the title of which I'm sure that I will remember psychically in just a moment. But what I will say is one of the things that happened on the call with Manda, and that is good to remember, is why you want to impart people with skeptical resources and humanist resources. And at least for me, sure, it may be encouraging and an activity that I enjoy, but I don't do it just for me. I'm doing it for them because it will help them live a better life. And sure, in the short term, having to face what is real in a way that you're unused to can be distressing, but it's always better to not make that worse, right? When surgeons do surgery, they put the patient under anesthesia first. And so finding the best way of making someone comfortable with this situation before you perform surgery to remove cancer is probably the best way to proceed.
A lot of it has to do with the motivations. I mean, if you're going into the conversation for the right reasons, then I don't have too many worries about having it. I mean, if you're going in there and there are atheists who are like this, and it bugs the crap out of me, but it seems that their goal is to show that they're smarter than everybody else in the room, or that, I stopped believing this stuff, why are you so childish, and blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And that is about them kind of needing to exercise the flaws in their character. If instead you're going into it with an honest appreciation to let's try to get to a truth. Let's try to get to the let's try to get to the truth. Let's try to get to an understanding. Let's figure out where we agree and where we don't. Let me explain why I honestly think this, and that I don't think that just because you believe something that's different from me, that doesn't mean you're stupid or a less valuable person. And if we're promoting skeptical and humanistic values, basically the notion that we have life, that we're stuck on a planet, that we have to figure out ways to deal with that and get along. Once we do that, it's not always going to turn out roses and puppies for everybody. Some people it might, and some people it won't. But I don't think you'd almost have to either be intentionally going out to try to cause harm or psychological trauma to people, or be the careless, indifferent, narcissistic ass that is just trying to show everybody that you're the smartest and best.
I guess the typical view of an atheist.
Yeah, I was going to say, for a split second, I thought you were going to say like a random name that you'd remembered, like unless you're trying to be the typical ass, like Steve or something. And I was like, whoa.
There are people that I could call out for various things, and I won't, because I don't want to ever give them attention. It's good enough to stay in the abstract and try to promote more positivity.
The ideas are more important than the people.
And by the way, I've screwed it up on occasion too. There's none of us are free from ego. None of us are free from making mistakes. I have been an ass on the show more than once. And I try to correct it. And the motivation to do better and be better, it doesn't completely make up for it, but it helps to make sure that I'm not making those mistakes all the time.
Yeah. So I would say...
Well, thank you very much for taking my call. What was the documentary? You mentioned that before. What was the name of it?
A Better Life by Chris Johnson. There's a book that goes with it.
Yeah, and if you go to, I think it's theatheistbook.com, you can find all the information about both the book and the documentary.
The Atheist Book.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
All right.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you for calling in today, Chris. All right.
Okay.
So I think that was a pretty good call. I didn't get to asking him if he'd thought about or looked at street epistemology. I know that that's not your particular flavor.
I don't have any objection to it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think you had an objection, but...
Now, Anthony and I have actually had conversations. There's a video up on my Atheist Debates project where we were talking about what I saw as both the benefits and possible problems with street epistemology, and we are largely in agreement. But I love him, and I love his style, and I think there's plenty of room for it. It's just I don't get as much value from like going out on the street and having the one-on-one conversation, even if it's recorded. Plus, it's hot in Texas, and he seems to tolerate that much better than I do.
I know, it's crazy. I would say there's something to be said, and I've certainly heard, it takes all kinds, it takes all approaches, that people are persuaded differently, even though generally they should do their best to be persuaded in the most reasonable way. Yeah,
but
wouldn't it?
We're different.
Yeah.
And the truth is that, when we talk about, like, for example, the fear of an existential crisis, there are people who almost instantaneously, when they realize that they don't have a good reason to believe in a God or a religion or supernatural stuff, feel liberated and free. And there are other people who become despondent and nihilistic because we're different. People believe for different reasons. They're going to give it up for different reasons, and they're going to respond in different ways.
They're going to feel differently about it. There's a close friend of mine who it wasn't so much that, life was meaningless, but there was a feeling of being like an individual and special in a specific way that they lost when they, departed from bad ideas. And I always found it difficult to understand what they meant. But
I think that those are the appealing things. First of all, the notion that even when it seems like everybody in the world is against you, there's still somebody who's for you.
Yeah.
The notion that when you're dead, it's not over. And the people that you love who've passed away, you're going to see them again. All of those are incredibly appealing ideas that it would probably be nice if something like that were true. And so I understand why people respond negatively on occasion when they find out, I have no good reason to believe that. But yeah, recognizing that we're dealing with human beings and they're all going to be different, which is why the Atheist Community of Austin is now producing 9 different programs covering a wide range of topics, because not only do we have Talk Heathen and Atheist Experience and nonprofits and Godless Bitches, Preaching Humanists, Secular Sexuality, Secular Parenting. That's 7.
Yeah.
What-
Atheist Roundtable.
Atheist Roundtable.
And the Atheist Interview Series.
Yes.
Atheist Interviews.
And there's probably
Going to be a 10.
more coming.
Yeah. I'm terrible at this. I hope Dan doesn't see this because the name of his show has slipped my mind in the moment.
Mr. Atheist.
No.
Truth Wanted.
Truth Wanted. That's right.
Holy crap.
You're psychic.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yeah. Sorry, Dan, if you're watching. I'm a little bit absent-minded from meetings earlier today. But what I was going to say is it's important to remember why we do what we do. Or at least the thing that I use as the motivation is because it helps people, right? Like, sure, you don't like it now because it's a difficult thing to address, but it helps people in the long term, and it takes all kinds, which is sort of why it's interesting that in Christian films, I would say bad Christian films, but I'm not sure there's a distinction. In Christian films, the reason that the mega atheist that's always it's Richard Hitchens, who is treated like a rock star and drinks too much and then is sad and is always like, well, God exists, but I'm mad at him. And it's always because my mom died from cancer. It's like more than 50% of the motivation of all their depictions of atheists. But it leads me to the question, if you are an atheist celebrity, does that mean that you go to a debate and then there's an after party that resembles an after party for, your typical rock star or whatever, and there's like people that are trying to offer you all the drugs, and it's ridiculous. Sorry, I'm judging by your face that these are movies you no longer watch or would have no interest in. No,
that, and as somebody who does a lot of debates, and, I won't pretend to claim that I'm necessarily a debate rock star, but I'm aware of, not only have I not had any after parties after the debate that sound like that, I'm really good friends with some people who people might suspect, and they don't go, those parties don't exist either. And literally, like when Sam and Richard and I we did a series of events, Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, we did a series of events, including in London and everything else. We tend to go to dinner before the thing and have, a nice meal. It's a good meal. And then after it's over, there's usually like 4 or 5 of us that end up at a bar drinking, talking about what happened, and then we part ways and fly home. So maybe there's an after party that I'm just not invited to because I'm not cool enough.
Well, yeah, maybe the Christians have that right in any case.